Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. My staff always write incredibly impressive speeches for me to give, and I will reassure you that I won't give the speech today. I made it through the half of the last two panels and heard all of Leslie's panel, and I've scribbled some notes down, partly in response to questions, but partly just in response to my thoughts as we head into Brussels. So if you'll give me just a few minutes, I'll make several points. First, I'd like to thank the AACC for their work. Chairman Lufty, Don, Jeff, the others that I won't be able to name, there's a lot of you here and I can't see through the lights. But AACC has been a consistent partner linking communities of interest in the United States with the communities of interest in Afghanistan. And it will continue to grow in importance. That's an audience and that's a market and that's an area of convergence that for us to succeed in the long term in Afghanistan has to be addressed. So I appreciate AACC and their role in doing that. They wouldn't be able, however, to have events like this one without the sponsors. And I know sponsors must sometimes cringe when they see Jeff darken their door or Don Ritter darken their door and say, we need you to help out again. But to the sponsors, Crown Agents, Clements, and SIPE, I sincerely appreciate your investment in AACC and allowing them then to invest time and energy into bringing together groups like this one. It's valuable. The most important part of this event, though, is the people who come and participate. I'm sure Jeff or others have called out their Business Opportunities Conference later in the year. I do these for Afghanistan and Pakistan as well, and I find them incredibly valuable. We recently had one on Pakistan, and it was up in New York, and the amount of business that got done was incredible. And I know that Afghanistan is not at the place Pakistan is with respect to development and ease of doing business, but for those of you who consider yourself frontier investors, I think Afghanistan is going to be, in the near term, a place where you can look to do business, depending on the sector. So the panels that you've had today have been the institutional perspective, and I understand that Craig showed a little bit of leg with respect to ADB's numbers for the donors conference. The congressional perspective, and I heard Mike Phelan saying how much he didn't know about Afghanistan. Mike and Damien are two of the smartest staffers on the Hill across the board. And one of the things I enjoy about working with the two of them is they know an awful lot about the country. When they don't know something, they aren't afraid to ask. And you could not pick out which is the Democrat and which is the Republican amongst the two of them. And, you know, God bless the days in Congress when we can go back to that kind of a perspective. The first two panels, I think, were important, the institutional perspective, the congressional perspective, but it was the private sector perspective that I think is most important. I say in almost all the fora that I talk to, I have an analogy I use where I say the development, in a medical perspective, the medical community is the emergency response. There's been a train wreck. There's been a war. The emergency responders show up and we stop the bleeding and we stabilize the patient. The institutions, the banks and the UN and others, they may become kind of the critical care to make sure that the patient continues to make progress. But the healthy lifestyle and the sustainment of that particular patient is in public-private partnerships. We won't be able to do it without the private sector going forward. So again, I think this third panel was quite instructive. I will do a little bit of propagandizing. You should have had on your table one of these pamphlets. I'd love to see you arm wrestle over it and take it home. It's a USAID Partnering for Impact, USAID in the private sector. Dr. Shaw, when he was the administrator, put a lot of effort into turning the ship of state to focus on this area of private sector, and I think we've made some progress in that regard. If you have questions, USAID will certainly be willing and happy to talk to you about private sector investments. I want to do another shout out on public-private partnerships, and that's to AUAF, the American University in Afghanistan. I know from my alma mater at Georgia Tech, the role of the university as a catalyst for innovative public-private partnerships in my home state of Georgia has been enormous. And I think I see roles for AUAF in that way building in Afghanistan. Their graduates, every time I talk to them, are increasingly impressive. And the ideas that they have for how to improve the lot of their own country are increasingly persuasive and interesting. So I would encourage you to develop a relationship with Leslie and with AUAF. Finally, on the road to Brussels. It's no surprise when I tell you that the news stories coming out of Afghanistan haven't been particularly brilliant. They don't typically cover the kinds of things that I would hope that they would cover. And that's probably appropriate. Afghanistan still, as was noted in the last panel, has challenges and opportunities ahead of it. But I think one of the challenges we in the international community are going to face as we go towards Brussels is helping the donor community, that is the ministers and the parliamentarians and the members of Congress who are going to be ponying up money at this conference in October, making sure that they have at least a glimpse of the opportunities that Afghanistan presents and not just the challenges and the risks. For every place in Afghanistan that there is hardship and there's still open conflict, I can name a half dozen places where there are business opportunities and where businesses are flourishing. If I could put you on planes and fly you into Mazar-i-Sharif without going through Kabul, you would never know in Mazar-i-Sharif that you're in a war-torn country. If I could fly you in from Tehran to Herat, likewise, you would know that you were in an economic center built around marble and quarrying, but you would not know that you were in a war-torn country. I would humbly suggest that the challenges Afghanistan faces are more along the lines of governance, as we discussed with the Ministry of Mines and Petroleum. I have less time than many people in this room on Afghanistan, and it's my humble opinion that what's holding us back on mines and petroleum is primarily a capacity issue at the Ministry of Mines and Petroleum. I have sat in very close meetings where we talk about a particular tender or a particular award, and it has been the ministry's self-assessed inability to properly manage the award that has, I think, quite prudently caused them to pull back and wait. Once you make these awards, you can't unmake them. And I applaud the government of Afghanistan's deliberateness and their caution, but I also think there's much that can be done in that sector. And that will be discussed between now and when we get to Brussels. I'm not going to bore you with a litany of all the things that are going right. Most of you have heard our talking points. If not, catch me after and I'll give you a copy of them. But I think what we should focus on is helping Afghanistan identify challenges that keep you from doing business there. The ease of doing business issue, the corruption issues, the issues with security in places where businessmen have to be able to operate. Those are things that we need to address between now and Brussels and at Brussels. We also need to focus on the poverty and the quality of life for the Afghan people. President Ghani came into office with very high expectations on his own, but also of the Afghan people for him and of the donors for him. He's going to have to be able to show some quality of life improvements and to show promise. And so I'll finish with a note to my colleagues at the Afghan Embassy. There is nothing better and nothing more uplifting and optimistic and generating optimism and inspiration than to hear that the ambassador and his wife are expecting a child. As we go forward, I hope you'll let the ambassador know that I close my remarks saying we're not doing this for our generation. What we're doing in Afghanistan and the business opportunities you're going to help us realize in Afghanistan are for that next generation. So with that, again, thank you all for being here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you.